The first thing I heard that Saturday morning was my dogs absolutely losing their minds. Baxter has this deep, rolling warning bark he uses specifically when squirrels are committing crimes near the fence line. It's authoritative, serious, the bark of a dog who has decided that the integrity of this property is his personal responsibility, and he is not going to take the morning off. Duke, on the other hand, barks like he's auditioning for an action movie. Every single time. No volume control, no restraint, just pure theatrical commitment to the alarm. Together they functioned as the neighborhood warning system that absolutely nobody asked for, but that I'd come to appreciate in ways I could never have predicted when I first brought them home. I rolled over, grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and saw it was barely past 6 in the morning. Then the backyard motion alert popped up on the screen. And I already knew, before I even opened the camera feed, before the footage loaded, exactly who it was going to be. Sure enough, there she was, Lena, standing in my backyard with the complete comfort and ownership of a person who pays property taxes there. She wore oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head, had 2 large reusable grocery bags slung over each arm, and was moving through my garden with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided, apparently some time ago, that what grew in my yard was simply available for general community use. She worked her way down the peach tree methodically, squeezing each piece of fruit before selecting it, the way you squeeze fruit at a farmer's market before deciding whether it's worth the price. And if one didn't meet her standards, she tossed it directly onto the grass. One of my tomatoes apparently failed her quality inspection as well, because she dropped it straight into my flower bed without breaking stride. Meanwhile, my dogs were barking themselves hoarse behind the fence, 12 feet away from where she was standing. Lena didn't even look at them. She didn't look at the cameras either. At one point, she actually turned toward the security camera mounted near my greenhouse, looked directly at the lens, and gave it a small, sarcastic wave. The gesture of someone who is fully aware that rules exist and has simply decided they don't apply to her specifically. That was Lena. That was every interaction I'd ever had with Lena. And that particular Saturday morning, standing on the wrong side of my fence with her grocery bags and her confidence and her total absence of self-awareness, she was about to have one of the more educational mornings of her adult life. I need to explain how we got to this point, because the Pepper situation didn't emerge from nothing. It was the result of months of escalating absurdity that I had been living through in a neighborhood where people treated HOA regulations like constitutional amendments. I bought my house 4 years ago. The backyard at that time looked like every other HOA-approved suburban yard in the subdivision. Flat grass, tiny decorative bushes that served no actual purpose, a lonely patio chair that nobody used, the kind of outdoor space clearly designed by someone who considered being outside a mild inconvenience to be endured rather than enjoyed. Within a few months, I had already decided I needed to change things. Gardening started as stress relief after a difficult year at work. I planted tomatoes first, then peppers, then some citrus trees that I wasn't entirely sure would survive the climate, but that did fine. The hobby accelerated. Raised garden beds went in, then an irrigation system, then fruit trees along the back fence line. Eventually, and this became the central drama of my first 2 years in the neighborhood, I built a greenhouse. The greenhouse became an entire HOA battle, and Lena was at the center of it. She filed the initial objection at an HOA meeting, describing my proposed structure as making the neighborhood look agricultural. I remember sitting in that meeting watching her say the word agricultural with genuine disgust while seated directly beneath a large frame painting of a vineyard landscape that the HOA had apparently hung in the clubhouse because they found it elegant. A vineyard, in a frame, on the wall. Classy. My greenhouse, however, was civilization quietly collapsing. It took 3 months of approval forms, inspections, precise measurements, and HOA committee debates before they finally signed off on it. By the time construction finished, I had essentially earned an informal degree in suburban bureaucracy through sheer exhausted persistence. But it was worth every form. The greenhouse became my favorite part of the whole property. Warm, humid air, vines climbing up hanging supports, rows of peppers in every color imaginable, citrus trees near the back windows soaking up afternoon sunlight, shelves lined with seedlings and tools. Peaceful, genuinely peaceful. Right up until Lena developed what I can only describe as a very strong interest in community produce access. The thefts started gradually, the way these things do. A few lemons went missing, then some peaches, then entire grocery bags full of tomatoes and citrus disappeared overnight. I installed cameras after the second incident. After the fourth, I added signs, printed, laminated, posted clearly at every entry point to the garden. Private garden, do not touch produce, property under video surveillance. Simple, clear, impossible to misunderstand unless you were specifically motivated to misunderstand. When I confronted Lena directly the first time, I tried to be reasonable about it. I told her if she wanted fruit, she could just ask. I usually had extra anyway, and I was happy to share. Instead of any acknowledgement of having done something wrong, she crossed her arms and told me that, technically, plants extending near shared property space become accessible to adjacent residents. She said it the way someone says something they've convinced themselves is true through the sheer force of wanting it to be true. I told her that wasn't a law. She told me it was common neighborhood etiquette. I told her common etiquette was not entering someone's backyard at 6 in the morning carrying grocery bags. She looked at me like I was the unreasonable one in the conversation and walked away. After that exchange, the theft got worse. Not better, worse. Like she had taken my frustration as a personal challenge. The camera footage became genuinely remarkable over the following weeks. One clip showed her coming through my side gate carrying what appeared to be an insulated shopping bag, the kind people use to keep groceries cold on the drive home. Another showed her stepping directly through my flower bed to reach peaches near the center of the tree. One morning, and this is the one that still makes me shake my head, she actually brought a friend. A friend. The two of them wandered around my garden having a full conversation about my tomatoes, gesturing at different plants, discussing which ones looked best, while my dogs lost their minds at the patio door, and I watched the footage later with a particular combination of disbelief and grudging admiration for the audacity involved. I escalated on my end. More cameras, motion lights, additional signs. I added small placards near individual garden beds, each one politely requesting that people refrain from picking produce that didn't belong to them. Lena complained to the HOA that the signs felt aggressive. I told her, as clearly as I could manage, that the signs only felt aggressive if you were planning on ignoring them. The HOA was, throughout all of this, magnificently useless. Civil disagreement between neighbors, they told me, every single time. This was a board that had once issued a formal written warning because someone's trash can had been visible from the street for 14 minutes past the designated retrieval window. But they were apparently completely powerless in the face of someone repeatedly entering a neighbor's private property and helping herself to whatever looked good. The double standard was something I thought about often, lying awake on evenings when the camera had caught another visit. The pepper story actually begins a few weeks before the Saturday morning in question. I'd always grown unusual peppers alongside everything else in the greenhouse. Not because I'm particularly interested in competitive spice consumption or whatever people do with the internet's hottest pepper challenges, but because the plants themselves are genuinely beautiful. Different colors, wildly different shapes, an enormous range of heat levels, and under the greenhouse lights they looked almost artificial, like something from a botanical illustration rather than something growing in a suburban backyard. Bright red Carolina Reapers hanging from their vines next to twisted ghost peppers, orange and red and purple in rows against the glass. Visitors who came for legitimate reasons always stopped to look at the pepper section. It was, objectively, the most visually dramatic corner of the greenhouse. Lena had noticed. I caught it on camera footage one afternoon. Instead of her usual direct path to the peaches, she slowed near the greenhouse entrance and spent a full minute staring at the pepper rows through the glass. She took out her phone and zoomed in, took pictures. A few days after that, I overheard her at an HOA meeting talking to two neighbors about an upcoming dinner party she was hosting. Something upscale, something with a particular emphasis on quality ingredients. "I only buy organic produce now," she was saying loudly. "Store vegetables are basically flavorless." She was saying this while having spent the entire summer eating my produce for free. Then she mentioned wanting red, rare gourmet peppers for cooking, that she'd heard they were incredibly difficult to source and expensive to buy. The idea arrived quietly and completely naturally. Not revenge, I want to be clear about this, not anything designed to harm anyone. Just the simple, elegant logic of consequences. Natural consequences. The kind that exist precisely because warning signs and locked gates and repeated requests had all failed to communicate what a grown adult apparently needed to learn through direct experience. My greenhouse had multiple warning labels. The pepper containers were individually marked. Some plants had tags specifically mentioning extreme heat levels. I wasn't setting anything up. I wasn't altering anything. I was simply continuing to maintain my garden exactly as I always had, with all the same warnings in all the same places, and waiting to see whether Lena's confidence would eventually outrun her caution. I watered my plants, fed my dogs, checked the cameras, and waited. Let me tell you about Carolina Reapers, because I think people underestimate what they're dealing with when they look at a small, wrinkled, bright red pepper and decide it probably can't be that bad. I started growing them after a late-night gardening video made the process sound manageable and interesting. The first batch grew beautifully. Small, deeply red, with that distinctive curling tail at the bottom that makes them look slightly menacing even before you understand what they are. The first time I handled one without gloves and then absent-mindedly rubbed my eye 3 hours later, I briefly experienced what I can only describe as a preview of a very unpleasant afterlife. After that incident, the pepper section of the greenhouse was treated with the same respect you'd extend to a chemistry lab. Dedicated gloves, separate containers, clear warning labels on every plant, every container, every shelf. A sign near the greenhouse entrance that said, "Yes, they are really that hot," in what I hoped was a clear and good-natured tone. The ghost peppers were similarly labeled. The habaneros had their own tags. Every plant in the high heat section was identified by name and heat level because that was the responsible thing to do, and because I occasionally had people over to see the garden, and I preferred they didn't end their visit in crisis. Lena began what I can only describe as a surveillance operation in the days following her overhead conversation interest in rare gourmet peppers. She would slow near the fence during her evening walks, not trespassing, just scouting, watching the greenhouse from the sidewalk with the focused attention of someone planning something. The dogs tracked her every pass. Baxter would growl whenever she slowed. Duke would issue a running commentary. I caught her one evening peeking through the fence slats with her sunglasses on, holding her phone up as though pretending to be on a call, her eyes very clearly aimed at the greenhouse interior. She conducted surveillance like a cartoon villain, and I watched it unfold from inside my own greenhouse with a watering can in one hand and a growing certainty about where this was heading. I had two options. Option one, confront her again, start another circular argument that would change nothing, and produce another HOA complaint about aggressive gardening signage. Option two, continue doing exactly what I was doing, maintaining my garden in exactly the state it was already in, and let the natural consequences of entering a clearly labeled greenhouse and eating things you don't understand do their instructional work. I chose option two. The Saturday it finally happened was one of those warm, golden suburban mornings that HOA brochures use for their cover photos. Kids on bikes somewhere down the street, sprinklers clicking in adjacent yards. I was on my second-floor balcony trimming dead leaves from a hanging plant, garden hose in hand. The dogs stretched beside me in the sun, doing their professional nothing. Peaceful in every direction. Then Baxter's ears went up. 1 second later, both dogs launched into full alarm mode simultaneously. I looked down. Lena pushed through my side gate wearing a fitted red business casual outfit like she was heading to an open house, and had simply stopped off for some free produce along the way. Sunglasses on her head, designer tote bag tucked under one arm. She walked through my backyard with the complete confidence of someone returning to a familiar space. No hesitation, no nervousness, not even a glance around to check whether anyone was watching. She'd clearly moved past stealth as a strategy and had arrived at something closer to brazenness. She looked up, spotted me on the balcony, and gave me a tiny, annoyed wave. Like I was the inconvenient one in this scenario. "You really should train those dogs better," she called up. "You really should stop entering my yard," I said back. She ignored this completely. Her phone buzzed with the camera alerts. Every motion sensor on the property lit up simultaneously, tracking her through the garden path toward the peach trees. She worked quickly, filling her bag with practiced efficiency, and then she turned toward the greenhouse. I set the hose down and gave her my full attention. The greenhouse door was cracked. I'd left it open slightly for airflow that morning, which I did on warm days. The moment Lena noticed the opening, her expression changed. From the balcony, I watched it happen. That specific shift from purpose to excitement. The look of someone who has been waiting for exactly this and has just found the window they needed. She moved toward it slowly, looked through the glass at the rows of hanging peppers inside, and I heard her say, just audible from where I stood, "Oh, these look expensive." Then she stepped inside. The greenhouse in summer afternoon light is genuinely beautiful. Warm golden sunlight coming through the glass panels, vines hanging overhead, the peppers themselves practically glowing, deep red, orange, twisted and vivid. Lena stood in the middle of it for about 10 seconds, looking around with wide-eyed appreciation. She inspected the ghost pepper plants carefully, almost delicately, moving through the rows with what looked briefly like genuine respect for the plants. Then she started filling her bag, fast, decisively, like someone racing a timer, one handful, then another. She was clearly operating on the assumption that impressive-looking peppers in a well-maintained greenhouse meant premium cooking ingredients, and she was not going to waste the opportunity. The warning signs were visible from exactly where she was standing. I watched her walk past the one that said, "Extremely hot peppers, use gloves, not for casual consumption." I watched her reach past the sign that said, "Yes, they are really that hot." I watched her lift a Carolina Reaper between two fingers, examine it at eye level, and say out loud to nobody, "How? These don't even smell spicy." I have thought about that sentence many times since. It is a sentence that demonstrates in 10 words everything there is to know about Lena's relationship with information she doesn't want to be true. Then she took a bite. Not a cautious nibble, not the careful, exploratory taste of someone uncertain about what they're eating. An actual, confident, committed bite. The bite of a person who has decided they know what they're dealing with and is not going to be timid about it. For a moment, nothing happened. She chewed thoughtfully, examined another pepper in her other hand, tilted her head slightly the way people tilt their heads when they're deciding what they think of a flavor. I watched from the balcony thinking, for exactly 1 second, that maybe she'd gotten genuinely lucky and grabbed something mild. Then the pause, that tiny, telling shift in posture. Her eyebrows pulled together. She swallowed carefully. A second passed. Then another. Then her eyes went wide and she said, "Oh." Just one word, in a tone that contained the complete and total recognition of a catastrophic personal decision. The heat from the Carolina Reaper doesn't arrive immediately. That's the thing that gets people every time. There's a delay, just long enough to create confidence, just long enough for you to think you might be getting away with it. Then it lands all at once, and it does not negotiate. Lena dropped the pepper on the greenhouse floor and grabbed her throat. She spun around looking for water. She coughed once, then harder again, her face going bright red in the specific way that has nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with capsaicin hitting mucous membranes with its full force. "Oh my God," she coughed. "Oh my God, what is—" She stumbled backward into a planter box. Several peppers scattered across the greenhouse floor. My dogs, 8 feet away and 3 feet above, were barking like they were narrating a crime in progress. Lena fanned her mouth with both hands, tears streaming, mascara moving south, pacing in a tight, frantic circle. "What is wrong with these?" she demanded. "What did you do to these?" I leaned on the balcony railing. "The warning signs were a clue," I said calmly. She looked up at me with an expression that I can only describe as betrayed. "You grew poison peppers. They are Carolina Reapers. That is insane. You stole them." That, somehow, offended her more than the pepper itself. She grabbed a nearby watering can and immediately dumped water directly into her mouth, which is one of the classic mistakes people make in these situations. Water does not help with capsaicin. Water, in fact, spreads it. The coughing intensified. She paced, knocked into more pots, scattered more produce across the ground, while I watched from above with a combination of genuine amazement that any adult could reach this outcome after seeing multiple warning labels and the specific, resigned satisfaction of someone who has been patient for a very long time. She started pulling random leaves off nearby plants in her panic. That was when I picked up the garden hose and aimed a gentle stream down toward the greenhouse entrance. Not at her directly, just near the entrance, so she could rinse her hands and stop grabbing everything in reach. The moment the water hit the pavement, she rushed toward it and stuck her face directly under the stream, which helped somewhat. Scattered peaches and ghost peppers rolled across the grass around her feet. Security cameras recorded every second from 3 different angles. By this point, the commotion had attracted the neighborhood. Curtains were moving, garage doors opened. The retired man across the street was standing frozen on his front lawn with a garden hose still running, watching Lena pace around my backyard, coughing like a smoke alarm. Someone upstairs in the adjacent house was looking out their window. At least one person was very obviously recording on their phone. And Lena noticed, which was the moment the embarrassment hit harder than the pepper had. She realized people were watching. Not just me on the balcony, not just my dogs, actual neighbors seeing this in real time without her ability to control the narrative afterward. She grabbed her tote bag, still stuffed with stolen produce, and marched toward the side gate. Halfway there, she stopped, bent over, coughing again. Then, with a burst of something between outrage and drama, she turned and dumped the entire bag out onto my grass. Peaches rolled in every direction. Ghost peppers scattered across the walkway. A tomato hit the fence and exploded. "This neighborhood is unbelievable," she announced hoarsely, and disappeared through the gate with both hands pressed to her mouth. The dog stopped barking. Silence settled over the yard. I looked down at the scattered produce covering my lawn, then at the greenhouse, then at the camera notifications still buzzing on my phone, then at the trail of rolling peaches slowly coming to rest against the fence posts. I went inside and made coffee. I assumed, reasonably, that this was the end of it. No reasonable person would voluntarily bite the world's hottest pepper in someone else's clearly labeled greenhouse, get thoroughly defeated by the experience in front of half the neighborhood, dump stolen produce on the homeowner's lawn in theatrical defeat, and then continue the fight. I underestimated Lena. By Monday morning, I had an email from the HOA announcing an emergency complaint regarding my hazardous landscaping conditions designed to threaten residents. I read that email. I set my coffee down. I read it again. Then I laughed for a genuinely long time, because hazardous landscaping is one of those phrases that means absolutely nothing and sounds simultaneously ridiculous and extremely serious, which made it the perfect Lena complaint. Peppers were now acts of suburban terrorism. But when the laughter faded, I realized something important had shifted. Every previous complaint Lena had filed had been based on accusations and rumors, things she could shape through selective description and careful framing at HOA meetings. This time, I had evidence. Concrete, time-stamped, high-definition evidence of repeated trespassing from a system she had waved at sarcastically for months. And within hours of the HOA complaint going out, 2 separate neighbors quietly contacted me asking if I was going to the hearing, mentioning that they had stories of their own and would be interested in attending if the footage was going to be shown. For the first time since moving in, I was not approaching an HOA proceeding alone. If you've never attended an HOA disciplinary hearing, the best description I can offer is, imagine a courtroom designed by people who are deeply invested in mailbox colors, folding chairs in rows, fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look slightly guilty of something. A long plastic table at the front where HOA board members sit with the practiced authority of people who have convinced themselves their decisions carry real weight. A faint smell of burnt coffee that nobody acknowledges. The hearing was the following Thursday evening in the neighborhood clubhouse, and by the time I arrived, the room was substantially fuller than I had expected. The phrase, emergency safety complaint, it turned out, was extremely effective at generating attendance. Or people were just genuinely excited to watch Lena's confidence finally meet the consequences it had been earning all summer. Possibly both. I came in carrying a folder of printed screenshots, timestamps, and a flash drive with the camera footage. Lena arrived 2 minutes later, looking like she was entering a legal drama. Perfect hair, sharp blazer, oversized sunglasses that she removed slowly upon sitting. The entire presentation of someone who intends to control the narrative. A few people avoided her eyes when she sat down. Others were too interested in what was about to happen to look away. Martin, the HOA president and retired accountant, who treated meeting procedure with the reverence of religious ritual, cleared his throat and called things to order. He turned to Lena first. You filed the complaint. You may explain the situation. Lena inhaled the way people inhale when they've been rehearsing. I experienced a dangerous incident caused by intentionally hazardous landscaping practices. The property owner knowingly cultivated excessively dangerous plants without proper containment. I entered the greenhouse area to inspect for potential HOA violations involving vegetation overgrowth. Somewhere in the back row, someone made a sound that was technically a cough. Lena continued. While there, I accidentally consumed an unlabeled pepper that caused severe distress. I believe the greenhouse was intentionally designed as a trap. Martin looked at me. Do you have evidence regarding the complaint? Absolutely, I said. I plugged the flash drive into the clubhouse television. You could see the moment Lena remembered the cameras existed. Her entire posture shifted in the specific way of someone who has just remembered something they would very much prefer to have forgotten. I opened the first clip. Timestamp 6:14 a.m. Lena entering my backyard with reusable grocery bags, selecting peaches with the careful methodology of a produce professional. No ambiguity, no possible alternative interpretation. High definition, perfectly framed, everything exactly as it had happened. Nobody spoke. The next clip. Different date, different angle. Lena filling a tote bag with lemons while stepping through my flower beds. Another clip. She waves at the camera while removing tomatoes from my raised garden bed. A board member leaned backward and folded his arms. Then the clip where she brought a friend. That one caused audible murmuring. Someone behind me whispered, "Wait, she brought someone else?" With genuine disbelief. I paused the footage. For context, all of these recordings occurred after multiple verbal requests for her to stop entering my property. I moved to the next image, a clear photograph of the greenhouse entrance and its warning signs. Private garden, do not touch produce. Property under video surveillance. Then another. Extremely hot peppers, use gloves, not for casual consumption. The words were clear in the photograph, readable from across the room with no difficulty. Lena crossed her arms. Those signs weren't prominent enough. A woman in the second row made a sound she quickly disguised as a cough. Martin looked extremely tired. Then I played the greenhouse footage. The room went completely silent as Lena appeared on screen in her red outfit, moving through the rows of peppers with apparent enthusiasm. Everyone watched her inspect plants, watched her fill the bag, watched her pick up the Carolina Reaper and examine it directly beneath the warning sign. Then came the bite, then the pause, then the delayed realization moving across her face like weather arriving over a hill. The room erupted, not loudly, more like a wave of suppressed choking, people pressing their hands to their mouths, several people looking at their laps with great concentration. the specific physical effort of trying very hard not to make noise while finding something extremely funny. Martin paused the video on a frame where the warning sign was clearly visible above Lena's shoulder, the words practically glowing on the screen. He removed his glasses. "You ate unidentified peppers from a private greenhouse. How was I supposed to know they were dangerous?" I pointed to the frozen frame. The sign. The board member zoomed in. Martin looked at it for a moment, then looked at Lena, then said nothing, which was somehow more effective than anything he could have said. That's when Ruth, an older neighbor I'd waved to occasionally, but never spoken with at length, raised her hand. Martin nodded. She stood. "She stole my lemons last spring." Another hand went up. "She took tomatoes from our side garden." And another. "She stepped on our irrigation line." And then the whole room was moving, missing oranges, cut flowers, herbs taken from pots on someone's patio while they were inside making coffee, someone catching her reaching through fence slats. Lena tried to interrupt multiple times. "This is unrelated. That never happened. You people are exaggerating." But once a room full of suburban homeowners with long-harbored grievances finds an opening, it doesn't stop until everyone has said their piece. Martin eventually raised both hands for silence. The room settled. He looked at his notes. "Based on the evidence presented, the board finds no violation regarding the greenhouse or the pepper plants." Lena's jaw tightened. He continued without pausing. "However, we do have documented evidence of repeated trespassing and removal of property from another resident's yard, with at least 12 separate recorded incidents." Her face went red, genuinely this time. A board member counted through the printed screenshots out loud, quietly, as if to himself. 12. Any future incidents may involve law enforcement if requested by the property owner. Additionally, you will be responsible for reimbursing the damaged garden planters shown in the footage. Lena stared at him. "You're penalizing me? You entered private property repeatedly after multiple warnings. She grew dangerous peppers." Martin looked at her for one measured moment. "They are peppers," he said, with the flat finality of a man who is done with the entire conversation. Something in the room, the pressure that had been building through the whole proceeding, released all at once, and half the people present looked at their hands or the ceiling or anywhere else that wasn't Lena's face. The hearing ended. But the story had already spread before anyone got home that night. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood knew, not the version Lena would have preferred, not victim of hazardous gardening infrastructure, but the actual version, the one involving months of systematic produce theft and a fully grown adult confidently biting into the world's hottest pepper in a clearly labeled private greenhouse on a Saturday morning. Kids riding bikes started calling it the spicy garden when they passed my house. Someone left an anonymous pepper-shaped keychain in my mailbox. A neighbor dropped off homemade hot sauce with a note that said, "Thought you'd appreciate this. Well played." Even Baxter and Duke achieved a kind of neighborhood celebrity. People passing the fence would say, "Good job protecting the peppers, boys." And Baxter accepted the praise with the dignified gravity of a decorated soldier. Lena vanished socially for weeks. No HOA meetings, no neighborhood walks, no passive-aggressive posts about community standards on the neighborhood social media page. Silence. Complete and glorious. For the first time since moving in, my fruit ripened naturally on the trees. My tomatoes made it to harvest without disappearing overnight. Peace returned to the backyard in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing until suddenly it was back. About a month later, I was harvesting peppers near the greenhouse at sunset when I heard someone clear their throat near the fence. I looked up. Lena was standing there, holding her keys. No sunglasses this time, no dramatic outfit, just the particular awkwardness of a person who has something uncomfortable to say and has decided to say it anyway. The dogs noticed her. Baxter gave a low, warning grumble. Duke looked at her, looked at me, then sat down to observe. Lena looked at the ground for several seconds. Then she sighed. "I handled things badly." I had to work to keep my expression neutral, because those 4 words were possibly the most unexpected sentence she had ever produced in my presence. She continued before I could respond. I shouldn't have entered your yard. You definitely shouldn't have eaten random peppers, I added. Her expression tightened. I know that. A pause. Then with apparent effort, your garden actually is impressive. I looked around slowly, as though checking for hidden cameras, because Lena complimenting my garden felt approximately as plausible as the original pepper incident. She pushed on before I could say anything. I was wondering, hypothetically, if you ever sell extra produce. You're asking to buy fruit from me. Legally this time. I laughed before I could stop myself. A real one, caught off guard. To her credit, she didn't turn and walk away. She stood there looking deeply annoyed at the situation and at herself and at me for laughing, but she stayed. So I looked at her for a moment and decided. Sure, I said, under a few conditions. She narrowed her eyes. No trespassing, she nodded. No HOA complaints about harmless gardening. She hesitated, then nodded again. And if you want something, you ask first, like a normal person. She exhaled dramatically, the exhale of someone surrendering something they've been holding for a long time. Okay. I walked over to the patio table where I'd been making salsa earlier that afternoon, scooped a small amount onto a chip, and held it out to her. Mild salsa, I offered. Lena looked at the bowl. Then she physically stepped backward. Nope. And I started laughing again, genuinely, and, for the first and possibly only remarkable time in our entire history as neighbors, Lena laughed too. Small, reluctant, embarrassed, definitely against her better instincts, but real. After that, things normalized in the specific way that things between 2 stubborn people who've been at war eventually normalize. Not warmly, not into anything resembling friendship, but into something workable. A ceasefire between 2 exhausted people who have discovered, through a great deal of unnecessary drama, where the actual boundaries are. She stopped stealing. I stopped adding increasingly pointed warning signs to every garden bed. The HOA found newer and less interesting things to complain about. My greenhouse stayed exactly where it was, full of peppers in every heat level, with all the cameras and all the warning signs and Baxter and Duke available to provide audio support whenever the occasion demanded it. Here is what I actually think about when I think about this whole story. Not the pepper moment, though that will live rent-free in my memory for a very long time, but the broader pattern of it. There is a particular kind of person who operates on the assumption that rules are for other people, who enforces standards with one hand while quietly ignoring them with the other, who files complaints about mailbox angles and grass height and wind chimes while entering neighbors' yards before sunrise with grocery bags. The confidence that enables that behavior is real, genuine, total, completely functional confidence in the person's own version of events. It just doesn't survive contact with a camera system and a room full of neighbors who have been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The signs were there the whole time. Multiple signs, literally, labeled, laminated, posted clearly. The information was available. The consequences were predictable. What changed was simply that someone finally stopped asking permission to be inconvenienced by the choices they were making. That was the whole lesson. And in this particular case, it came in the form of a small, wrinkled, bright red pepper that didn't smell spicy. Those are always the ones you have to watch out for. If this story made you laugh, or if you've got a Lena of your own somewhere in your neighborhood history, drop it in the comments. I want to hear every version of this that exists, because apparently this is a universal experience, and I find that somehow comforting. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories like this one, and I will see you in the next one.